Becoming emperor of Rome was like grabbing the golden crown in a game where everyone else had daggers. You got to wear purple, command armies, and bathe in marble pools. But you also signed up for a very short life expectancy. The moment that laurel wreath touched your head, so did the weight of 1,000 plots. Almost every emperor had enemies the moment they took power, and the smarter ones knew it. Being emperor was less about ruling and more about surviving. Rome didn't operate on kindness. It ran on suspicion, bribes, and blood. Everyone was playing a game, and the emperor was just the biggest piece on the board. Assassination wasn't shocking in ancient Rome. It was expected. When emperors died, people didn't gasp. They just asked, who's next? The empire had a rhythm, and that rhythm included an emperor dropping dead every few years, sometimes by dagger, sometimes by dinner. Being emperor meant living in a cage of luxury. You had gold, slaves, villas, and feasts, but also spies in your walls and poison in your soup. Many emperors were killed by the people closest to them. Wives, sons, generals, even their own bodyguards. The men sworn to protect them often became the ones holding the blade. That's the thing about power. Once people taste it, they rarely want to give it back. Poison was one of Rome's favorite murder tools. Mushrooms, wine, perfume. All of them could carry death. You couldn't trust food, drink, or even a kiss on the cheek. Some emperors hired official tasters. Others watched their servers like hawks. Still, many dropped dead at the dinner table anyway, their final breath taken over roast goose and honey cakes. The pressure didn't just come from outside threats. Sometimes it boiled up from inside the emperor's own mind. Absolute power didn't always breed wisdom. Sometimes it led to madness. A few emperors believed they were gods. One declared war on the sea. Another dressed as Hercules and demanded worship. When you sit alone at the top for too long, reality starts to bend. Some emperors weren't murdered. They simply unraveled. You might think being emperor came with a long rule and peaceful retirement, but Rome didn't do slow exits. Most emperors reigned for just a few years before their accidents. If you made it to 10 years, that was basically retirement. 15, people got suspicious. A long reign wasn't normal. It was unnatural. And unnatural things in Rome usually didn't last. The weirdest part is how normal all of this became. Stabbings in theaters, stranglings in bathhouses, forced suicides in gardens. It was just another Tuesday in Rome. The people barely blinked. Sometimes they even cheered. The empire didn't mourn dead emperors, it recycled them. Even the architecture seemed to know what was coming. Statues crumbled, thrones cracked, mosaics faded. Every new emperor repaired what the last one broke, and then tried not to meet the same end. Rome glittered on the surface, but underneath it all was a deep sense of doom. The empire lived forever, but its rulers rarely made it past dinner. And yet, men still lined up for the job. Power is a sweet poison, and they all drank from the same cup. Every man thought he'd be the one to outlive the blade, to rewrite fate, to survive. But history had other plans. Rome had no shortage of crowns or coffins. So as we begin this slow, candlelit journey through the final moments of emperors, remember, these weren't just rulers. They were humans, just like us. They had egos, fears, strange habits, and very, very bad luck. Their ends were often tragic, sometimes ridiculous, always fascinating. Welcome to Rome, where even the most powerful men couldn't escape a strange death. Before there were emperors, there was Julius Caesar, general, statesman, fashion trendsetter, and the man who turned Rome upside down. He never held the title of emperor, but his death kicked off the whole imperial circus. Caesar was charming, brilliant, and ruthless. He knew how to win battles and win crowds, but he also made enemies faster than he made history. And by 44 BCE, those enemies decided enough was enough. By the time Caesar returned to Rome after conquering Gaul, he was too powerful for comfort. He marched across the Rubicon with his army, a big uh-oh moment for the Senate. That wasn't just a military move, it was a declaration. I'm not just a general anymore, I'm Rome. From there, he took control. He became dictator for life, which sounded great to him and terrifying to everyone else. The senators started sweating. They believed Caesar was about to crown himself king, and Romans hated kings. The Republic was built on never letting one man have too much power. To the conspirators, Caesar wasn't saving Rome. He was strangling it. So they sharpened their knives, gathered their courage, and made a plan. A messy, brutal plan. March 15th, 44th, BCE, the Ides of March. A day Caesar was warned to beware, but he ignored it. He walked to the Senate like it was any other day. He smiled. He wore white. Some say a soothsayer shouted a final warning on the way. Caesar shrugged. He was Caesar. What could go wrong? Inside the theatre of Pompeii, where the Senate was meeting, the plot unfolded. One senator stepped forward, pretending to present a petition. Caesar waved him off. Another grabbed his robe. Then suddenly, a blade flashed. And then another, and another. He was surrounded. Dozens of men, many of them once his allies, now turned executioners. They stabbed him 23 times. He fought back at first, but as more joined in, over 60 men, he realized it was hopeless. Then came the moment that would haunt the world for centuries. Brutus, his close friend, raised his knife. "Et tu, Brute," Caesar whispered. "You too." That line, whether real or just poetic legend, still stings. After the killing, the senators thought they had saved the Republic. They imagined the people would thank them, statues would be built, speeches would be made. But instead, Rome panicked. The crowd saw Caesar's torn body and wept. The streets filled with chaos. Mark Antony gave a fiery speech, and just like that, the Republic began to crumble. Julius Caesar's funeral was more like a political firestorm. His body was burned in the Forum, not in some quiet family plot. People tore down benches to build the pyre. Mobs raged. Riots exploded. The man the senators had tried to erase became larger in death than he ever was in life. In the end, killing Caesar didn't stop tyranny. It paved the way for it. His adopted son Octavian rose from the ashes and became Augustus, Rome's first official emperor. The Republic the senators tried to save vanished. The empire was born. Caesar's death wasn't the end of one man. It was the beginning of centuries of emperors, many of whom would meet even stranger fates. Julius Caesar never ruled as an emperor, but he set the tone for everything that followed. His death was the blueprint for Roman power, grand, dramatic, and soaked in betrayal. His ghost haunted every emperor after him. They all knew the story. They all saw how it ended, and yet each one still reached for the crown. Caligula's name has become a warning, a whispered curse from the past. He ruled Rome for less than 4 years, yet his reputation is one of the darkest in history. At first, the people loved him. He was young, charming, and full of promise. But power, or maybe illness, twisted him into something else, something terrifying. soon he wasn't a ruler but a storm, unpredictable and violent, striking without reason. They called him Little Boot, a nickname from his childhood spent with soldiers. But as emperor, Caligula was no laughing matter. The man threw wild parties, burned through Rome's money, and allegedly did unspeakable things. Stories about him blur the line between fact and nightmare, from sleeping with his sisters to making his horse a priest. Some of these tales were propaganda, but some probably weren't. One of Caligula's strangest acts was declaring war on Neptune, the god of the sea. He marched his army to the coast, ordered them to attack the waves, and then had them gather seashells as trophies of victory. Was it madness? Was it a cruel joke? Nobody knew, but his soldiers obeyed, because defying Caligula often ended in blood. Some say his madness came from illness, maybe a fever that damaged his mind. Others think it was the trauma of losing his family to political purges. Or maybe it was just what happens when a young man is handed the world with no one to say no. Whatever the reason, by the end of his reign, even his closest guards feared him. They whispered behind closed doors. They watched his every move, and they began to plan. The assassination came in January 41 CE, beneath the palace, in a tunnel that led to the theatre. Caligula had just left a performance when the conspirators struck. They were his own Praetorian Guard, the men sworn to protect him. Maybe they'd had enough of his cruelty. Maybe they feared for their own lives. Either way, their daggers were ready. It wasn't a quick death. They stabbed him over and over, even as he screamed, even as his blood pooled on the cobblestone floor. It wasn't just murder. It was rage, revenge, and fear, all wrapped into one brutal moment. His bodyguards didn't just kill him. They destroyed him. The violence didn't stop with him. His wife, Caesonia, was dragged away and stabbed to death. Their infant daughter's head was smashed against the wall. It was a message as much as a killing. The Senate and the soldiers wanted to wipe Caligula's family from existence, as if erasing his bloodline would erase the madness. When the deed was done, Rome was in shock. Caligula's body was dumped into a shallow grave. His reign had been a nightmare, but his death was no less chilling. People whispered that the gods themselves had punished him. Others whispered that the next emperor might be even worse. In a way, Caligula's death taught Rome a lesson. The empire could kill its rulers just as easily as it could crown them. The purple robe was a symbol of power, but it was also a curse. Anyone who wore it risked becoming both a god and a ghost, all within a few short years. Today, Caligula is remembered less as a man and more as a warning. His madness, whether real or exaggerated, reminds us how power without limits can warp the human mind. His story isn't just about death in a dark tunnel. It's about how absolute rule can unravel both the ruler and the world around him. Claudius wasn't supposed to be emperor. People laughed at him. He stuttered, limped, and drooled. For years, he was kept out of politics and treated like the family embarrassment. But when his insane nephew Caligula was murdered, the guards found Claudius hiding behind a curtain. Instead of killing him, they saluted him. The man behind the curtain suddenly wore the crown. People underestimated Claudius, and that was his strength. Once in power, he surprised everyone. He reformed the government, expanded the empire, and built great public works. He was smarter than he looked, and he ruled for over a decade. But behind the respect he finally earned, trouble was simmering at home. Trouble with the name of Agrippina. Agrippina was Claudius's fourth wife, and she was playing a long game. She wanted her son Nero to become emperor, not Claudius's biological son, not the legal heir, her son. To make that happen, she needed Claudius out of the way, quietly, permanently, and she had a plan, one that started in the kitchen. On the night of his death, Claudius was served a plate of his favorite food, mushrooms. He bit in without hesitation. Shortly after, he began to convulse. He couldn't breathe. He vomited. Something was wrong, horribly wrong. Whether it was the mushrooms or something added to them, one thing was certain: the emperor was dying. As the poison took hold, Claudius struggled through the night. Some accounts say Agrippina panicked and ordered a doctor to finish the job. He may have slipped a poisoned feather down the emperor's throat, supposedly to help him vomit. Instead, it helped him die. Even death was dressed in ceremony. The next morning, Rome awoke to news that Claudius was dead. Agrippina announced it publicly, but only after Nero was already in position. She'd prepared everything ahead of time. The young heir stepped forward, and Rome had a new emperor before Claudius's body was even cold. Claudius was quickly forgotten. No great public mourning, no grand tomb, just silence. Agrippina got what she wanted, and Nero stepped into history, bringing with him a storm of madness that would soon make Caligula look tame. But Claudius? He vanished from the world he had held together with quiet brilliance. For centuries, people debated how Claudius died. Was it truly poison, or just a stomach illness? Ancient historians loved drama, so maybe the mushroom story was just a tale. But Agrippina had motive, access, and a reputation. If anyone could poison an emperor over dinner, it was her. Claudius's death marked a turning point in Rome. The quiet emperor who stumbled into power was replaced by one of history's most notorious rulers. And the poison, if that's what it was, reminded everyone in the empire. Power didn't just make you a target. It made your dinner a gamble. Today, Claudius is remembered not for his madness or cruelty, but for being underestimated. He ruled wisely in a brutal time, and may have died not because of failure, but because he succeeded too well. In Rome, even doing the job right could still get you killed, especially if someone else wanted your seat at the table. If Rome had a villain, it was Nero. At least that's how the stories go. He played music while the city burned. He murdered his mother. He killed his wife. He thought he was a god, an actor, and a poet all rolled into one. But beneath the madness was a scared young man who inherited a poisoned throne and slowly lost control of the empire and of himself. Nero didn't start out evil. At first, the people adored him. He gave speeches, lowered taxes, and threw lavish games. But under that charming surface was someone slipping into delusion. He wanted to act, sing, and perform on stage, not rule an empire. And when the responsibilities became too much, he started blaming and killing the people closest to him. The rumors about Nero killing his mother, Agrippina, aren't just whispers. They're carved into history. At first, he tried to sink her ship. When she swam back to shore, he sent men to stab her in bed. She had once ruled him from the shadows. Now he ruled alone. And Rome would feel the weight of that choice. Then came the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. For 6 days, the city burned. People screamed, temples collapsed, and neighborhoods turned to ash. No one knows if Nero started it, but many believed he did. They said he watched from a tower and played his lyre as flames swallowed the city. Whether true or not, the story stuck, because it felt just like him. After the fire, Nero needed a scapegoat. He blamed the Christians, a small, strange new cult that few Romans understood. He arrested them by the hundreds, tortured them, and burned them alive. His cruelty wasn't just personal anymore, it was public. Rome watched its emperor unravel and begin to terrify even his most loyal followers. As Nero spiraled, the empire began to crack. Governors rebelled, legions muttered. Even the Senate grew uneasy. Nero, obsessed with his art, ignored the signs. He toured Greece as a performer, collecting fake trophies and pretending everything was fine. Back in Rome, everything was not fine. Eventually, it all collapsed. The Senate declared him a public enemy. The guards abandoned him. Nero fled the city in disguise, hiding in the villa of a loyal freedman. For a man who had once been worshipped, it was a humbling fall. Alone, barefoot and shaking, he waited for soldiers to come take him. When they came for him, Nero didn't want to die. He begged for mercy. He asked someone else to kill him. No one would, so he pressed a dagger to his own throat and hesitated. Finally, with the help of a servant, he drove the blade in. His last words were soft, bitter, and tragic. "What an artist dies in me." With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the line that began with Augustus, ended in blood. Rome erupted into chaos. 4 emperors would rise and fall in a single year. But Nero's memory lingered. For some, he was a monster. For others, a misunderstood soul. His grave was unmarked. His legend, impossible to erase. Nero's story isn't just a tale of cruelty. It's a warning. Power without guidance, ego without boundaries, fear without restraint. He could have been a decent ruler, maybe even a great one. But he chose fame over duty, art over empire, and left Rome smouldering in his wake. His name became a symbol of how quickly the crown can crush a soul. Commodus was the son of the great Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher king, wise and disciplined. But Commodus didn't inherit his father's mind. He wanted cheers, not counsel, applause, not responsibility, and above all, he wanted to be seen as a gladiator, a god, and a legend. Rome hoped for a new golden age. Instead, it got a golden boy playing dress-up in a city already on fire. Commodus didn't care for governing. He left politics to his advisors while he trained in the arena. Not just as a fan, as a fighter. He fought gladiators, often rigged to lose. He charged the empire for each performance. Rome, ruled by an emperor who thought he was the main act in a circus, was losing patience. He changed the names of months to match his own, renamed Rome after himself, built statues of himself as demigods. At one point, he declared, "I am the Roman Hercules." It would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying, because while he played games, people disappeared, senators, rivals, even his own sister. By the end, Commodus stopped pretending to be an emperor altogether. He wore gladiator gear in the palace. He greeted foreign envoys with a sword in hand. His paranoia grew. So did his violence. Whispers turned into plans. People around him began to ask the same question. What happens if we just remove him? The plot began with his inner circle. His mistress, Marcia, his chamberlain, his wrestling trainer. Together, they slipped poison into his wine one night after training. He drank it. He vomited. It didn't work. The plan had failed. And so, they moved to Plan B, a much more personal approach. The next morning, as Commodus soaked in his bath, weakened and dazed, the final part of the plan unfolded. His wrestling partner, Narcissus, entered the room. No one stopped him. No one screamed. He stepped into the bath, and wrapped his arms around the emperor's throat. Narcissus strangled him slowly, using his own strength. No weapon, just hands and rage. Commodus kicked, flailed, then went still. The last emperor of the Nerva-Antonine dynasty died not in battle or glory, but naked in a tub, killed by someone who once called him friend. Rome didn't cry for Commodus. Statues were torn down, his name erased from monuments. The Senate declared him a public enemy, even though he was already dead. For a brief moment, the empire breathed again, but something had shifted. A line had been crossed. Rome's mask had slipped. His death ended the Pax Romana, a long peace Rome had enjoyed under wiser rulers. What followed was chaos, civil war, greedy generals, emperors who rose and fell like sparks in the dark. But people remembered Commodus, the boy who thought he was a god, the ruler who chose fame over legacy. Commodus didn't die a hero. He didn't even die a true villain. He died as something else, a symbol of how power, unchecked and unchallenged, eats itself. In the end, Rome didn't kill him because he was dangerous. It killed him because it was tired of being laughed at. Caracalla didn't do subtle. He was blunt, brutal, and deadly. When he became emperor, he immediately killed his brother, in their mother's arms, just to rule alone. After that, no one ever questioned how far he'd go to stay in power. He ruled not with wisdom, but with fear. And while he built walls and waged wars, his own death crept toward him from the least dignified corner imaginable, the side of the road during a bathroom break. Caracalla wasn't just violent, he was vengeful. When he killed his brother Gaeta, he didn't stop there. He ordered a purge. Thousands died. Gaeta's name was erased from monuments. Even family portraits were scraped clean. Rome had seen cruelty before, but Caracalla wore it like a badge. He didn't care who hated him, as long as they feared him too. He traveled constantly, dragging his army across the empire. He built the famous baths of Caracalla, but spent most of his reign outside of Rome, campaigning, taxing, and making enemies. His paranoia deepened with every mile. He had spies everywhere. He trusted no one. But he should have paid closer attention to one man, his own bodyguard. The man was named Justinus, a soldier whose promotion Caracalla had denied. Some say Caracalla mocked him. Others say Justinus simply saw an opportunity. Either way, the emperor gave him access, gave him trust, and one fateful day in 217 AD gave him the perfect moment. Caracalla was traveling near Kare, in modern-day Turkey. He stopped his horse and stepped off to relieve himself on the side of the road. Alone. No guards around. No helmet. Just a powerful man, at his most vulnerable, facing the open fields. And Justinus followed. The assassination was fast. One slash. That's all it took. Caracalla staggered forward and collapsed face first into the dirt. His blood soaked the soil. His guards rushed in, but it was already done. The Emperor of Rome had died midstream, not on a battlefield or a throne, but in the dirt, pants down, utterly alone. His killer didn't live long. The other guards struck Justinus down immediately, but the damage was done. Rome lost its emperor, and the people didn't mourn. Caracalla had ruled by fear, and when a ruler like that dies, the world doesn't weep, it just exhales. Caracalla's reign ended the way he ruled, suddenly and violently. His legacy was a mix of cruelty and construction. The famous baths still stand today, beautiful and calm, but behind their elegant arches lies the memory of a man who killed freely and died stupidly. He's not the most famous emperor, but his story lingers for one simple reason. It's undignified for a man who built statues of himself, declared himself a god, and lived like a warlord. To die in the act of relieving himself is oddly poetic. Rome gave him power. Nature gave him irony. Caracalla's death reminds us that even the mightiest can fall in the most human ways. History remembers his cruelty, but also his ending. Swift, small, and absurd. No one can rule forever. And sometimes, the empire doesn't crumble with thunder. Just the sound of one man letting his guard down for one fatal moment. Elagabalus became emperor at just 14 years old. A boy plucked from Syria, crowned by his mother's ambition, and dropped into the firestorm of Roman politics. He wasn't trained for rule. He was a high priest, devoted to a strange Eastern sun god. Rome expected an emperor. What it got instead was a teenager dressed in silk, obsessed with ritual, and very, very different. He brought his god with him, Elagabal, the sun in its fiercest form, and tried to force Rome to worship it. He built temples, changed religious rites, and merged Roman gods with Eastern deities. It wasn't just offensive, it was terrifying. The empire watched, confused and uneasy, as their teenage emperor turned religion into theatre. Elagabalus didn't stop at religion. He blurred every line Rome tried to draw. He wore makeup, married men and women, and once declared himself the bride of a god. Some called him wicked, others just called him wild. But in a world ruled by tradition, he stood out. And that alone made him dangerous. He took lovers publicly, sometimes soldiers, sometimes actors. He was said to offer money to doctors if they could turn him fully into a woman. Whether the stories were true or cruel exaggerations, one thing was certain. Rome didn't know what to do with him. And behind the whispers, the knives began to sharpen. His grandmother, once his biggest supporter, turned against him. So did the Praetorian Guard. The empire didn't care who he loved. It cared that he was unpredictable, unhinged, and impossible to control. Rome craved order. Elagabalus gave it incense, feathers, and fire. In 222 AD, it ended. He was only 18. The guards burst into the palace and found him hiding in a chest. He clutched his mother, screaming, begging. They didn't care. They dragged them both out, through the palace, into the street, and did what Rome always did to emperors it didn't understand. They stabbed him, beat him, tore him apart. His body was dragged through the streets. Crowds watched in silence. No cheers. Just the sound of sandals on stone and a trail of blood from a boy who tried to rule a world that never wanted him. His corpse was thrown into the Tiber River, as if Rome wanted to wash its hands of him completely. No grave, no mourning, just water and silence. But the ripples spread, and they never really stopped. Later, emperors erased his name, banned his memory, and wrote him off as a perverse mistake. But centuries later, people began to ask, was he truly mad, or just different? Was he dangerous, or simply ahead of his time? Elagabalus, the boy priest, the living contradiction, still won't leave history alone. In the end, Elagabalus didn't fall because he was cruel, but because he didn't fit. He crossed every line, broke every rule, lived by his own strange light, and that scared the empire more than any sword. He wasn't the worst emperor, just the one Rome couldn't understand. Not every emperor was famous like Nero or Caligula. Some ruled quietly, fought hard, and still ended up just as dead, sometimes in weirder ways. Take Aurelian. He was a strong leader, a soldier's emperor, the kind of man who fought barbarians by day and wrote reforms by night. But none of that saved him from a lie written on a piece of paper. The story goes like this. One of Aurelian's secretaries forged a document that made it look like the emperor was planning executions. Panic spread. A group of officers, fearing for their lives, didn't ask questions. They ambushed Aurelian on the road and stabbed him to death. All because of a forged list that turned out to be fake. Then there was Valentinian I, a tough, no-nonsense emperor who ruled like a drill sergeant. He didn't die by poison or sword. He died because he got too angry. During a negotiation with invading envoys, Valentinian started shouting. His rage grew so fierce that he burst a blood vessel in his brain and collapsed on the spot. Death by temper tantrum. Some emperors died in ways so strange they feel like myths. Take Emperor Jovian, who reigned for just 8 months. One night, he fell asleep in a room with a freshly painted charcoal brazier. The fumes built up. By morning he was dead, not by enemy swords, but by smoke in his sleep. Another emperor, Pertinax, was killed by the very guards who were supposed to protect him, the Praetorian Guard. They were angry about unpaid bonuses, so they marched into the palace and chopped him down like a criminal. Then they auctioned off the throne to the highest bidder. That's not a metaphor. They literally sold the empire. Some emperors died too quickly to even get their names remembered. Take Didius Julianus, the man who won that auction. He lasted only 9 weeks. The people hated him, the army despised him, and the Senate didn't even pretend to care. When his execution came, it was quiet, like deleting a bad idea before it spreads. Then there was Carus, who died on campaign under mysterious circumstances. Some say he was struck by lightning in his tent. Others whisper about assassination. Either way, the heavens opened that night, and Carus didn't walk out. Lightning or treachery, in Rome, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. Emperor Numerian died in his litter, carried by soldiers for days before anyone noticed the smell. His general kept the death secret to hold power, pretending the emperor was just resting. When the truth leaked, the deception unraveled. Numerian was dead. His general, Diocletian, became emperor. Rome moved on, like it always did. Even emperors who avoided battle, betrayal, and madness weren't safe. Some were poisoned. Some slipped on stairs. One may have died from choking on a hairball. When the crown sits heavy, even the little things can crush you. In the Roman Empire, death came from all directions, not just the sword. All of these emperors, the forgotten, the unlucky, the absurd, shared one thing. They reached for power. Some held it for years, others for days. Some ruled wisely, some not at all. But none of them escaped the strange and silent truth. In Rome, death wasn't always grand. Sometimes it was just weird. By the end of the Roman Empire, one thing was clear. Power in Rome came at a deadly cost. Over 100 emperors rose and fell, many by blade, some by betrayal, a few by sheer bad luck. They had armies, gods, temples, and laws. But none of them had protection from the empire itself. Because Rome didn't just serve its emperors, it consumed them. Some emperors reigned for decades. Others died within days. Some tried to bring peace. Others brought ruin. And many, no matter how hard they tried, became footnotes. They lived under marble ceilings and died on coal stone floors. Victims of poison, plots, or the quiet rot of their own ambition. The empire had no loyalty to its leaders. The same people who praised an emperor one week might cheer his death the next. Statues were built, statues were torn down. Names were carved into monuments, then chiseled out when memory became inconvenient. In Rome, power was rented, never owned. History often remembers the mad ones, Nero, Caligula, Elagabalus. But madness wasn't the rule. It was the symptom, the pressure, the isolation, the constant danger. It did something to the mind. Even the wise turned bitter. Even the just grew paranoid. In Rome, being sane could feel like a disadvantage. The empire didn't just take lives, it warped legacies. Some emperors were great, until someone rewrote their story. Others were tyrants, but became saints in death. Truth, in Rome, was flexible. What mattered wasn't how you ruled, but who told your story when you were gone. The emperors had temples and treasures, but many of them died afraid, alone, betrayed. They built walls and armies to keep danger out, but forgot how easily it could come from within. From a friend, a wife, a guard at the door. The empire was too large to see all at once, and sometimes it swallowed them whole. And yet, they kept coming. Men still fought, bribed and murdered for that throne. They still wore the purple, knowing full well it might strangle them. Because power, even deadly power, still dazzled. The idea of being emperor was stronger than the fear of ending like one. Eventually, the empire itself cracked. Not with a bang, but with exhaustion. The borders broke. The armies thinned. The throne changed hands so many times it lost meaning. But the echoes of those emperors, their mistakes, their deaths, their strange human ends, still live on. Not in palaces, in stories. Rome is gone, but the pattern remains. Power tempts, crowns glitter, and those who chase them often fall the same way, betrayed, alone, or undone by their own pride. The emperors of Rome weren't gods. They were men in golden masks, trying to hold on to something that couldn't be held. So now, as this story ends, we walk away from the marble halls and echoing tombs. We remember the emperors, not for how they ruled, but for how they fell. Each death strange, tragic, sometimes absurd. And in their endings, they remind us, even in the greatest empire the world has ever known, no one ruled forever.